Making your way through an endless stream. Silence cuts reality by the seams. Only for a moment, moments always seem to fade away. Searching for a picture goes out of reach. Holding on freedoms that yours to keep. Or only for a moment, moments always seem to fade away. Push through a door into an empty street. No one's there to meet you 'cause you're still asleep. But only for a moment, moments always seem to fade away. Just come in, see it. Just around the corner, you can make it, change it. You can't escape it. The future is coming, you see it. It's just you.
Hey everyone, Greg Staley here from Diverge Media. We're pleased to bring our next guest. She is the candidate, and I'm probably going to butcher the riding's name, for Coquitlam-Port Coquitlam. The second one gets me. Her name is Kimberly Brundell, and we brought her on because she has a bit of an interesting story about her journey to becoming a PPC, or People's Party candidate. Started out as an NDP voter, that turned into a Conservative Party voter at some point, and then eventually led to a transition as a People's Party candidate. So we're going to bring in, and we have the link in the description or in the comments section. If you have questions at the end of this interview, we'd like to bring you in. Kimberly has agreed to take questions from the audience. So if you have something that's pressing to you, you can join that link. You'll be in the back room, and I'll bring you in to the stream when the time comes. So we want engagement as much as possible. So please share this out, and do not hesitate to ask questions if you have them at the end of this interview. So everyone, let's welcome Miss Kimberly Brundell. Is it Miss or Mrs.?
It's Mrs.
Okay, so I got to make sure. So Mrs. Brundell, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, no problem. We're coming up very close to the election now. We're closing in on the last few days, and I thought I'd reach out to you, quite frankly, because the conversation on vote splitting has been prominent and is ramping up, if anything, as we close in on the election. And your journey to becoming a People's Party candidate is a little bit different than most. So can you just walk us through a bit of your background and how you started as an NDP voter and kind of the mindset around it, and then just the journey into becoming a People's Party candidate?
Yeah, so I grew up in the riding. It's Coquitlam-Port Coquitlam. Very hard to pronounce if you're not from there. But I grew up in this area, and my father was an Australian immigrant. And my dad was very tough Crocodile Dundee Australian. My mother was a flight attendant, and my uncle wrote peace agreements in the Middle East for the UN. So I always grew up around politics, and I was one of those really annoying 8-year-old kids that would say stupid things and try to converse at an adult level, and then everyone would sort of tease me and make fun of me. But then September 11th happened, and I was a week away from turning 14. It was my first year in high school, and I remember they bombarded us with the footage for weeks on our TV system. So every time you walked into a hallway or a classroom, you were just bombarded with CNN playing the footage over and over and over and over again. And so that's what really woke me up to politics. And I've always been very anti-establishment, very anti-authoritarian. I was like a little punk rock skater kid in high school with my like black short hair and the thick eyeliner, and I was singing Distillers lyrics all the time. And I loved Rage Against the
I'm
Machine.
one of the few people in this audience that probably got that reference.
Right?
So sorry.
But you know, and then when you're in high school, there's a lot of propaganda that goes on because it's very left leaning. And so I remember thinking it was totally normal that I had to write an essay on this anti-America paper that was like, it was a satirical essay about how stupid their healthcare system was. And I remember the messaging in all my social studies classes and everything was, America's stupid, Canada's better, they have a terrible system. And I remember, you know, we did like the political party breakdown when I was in grade 11, and it was like, oh, NDP, like they care about marginalized people. They care about like gay rights. They care about this and that. And so I always just assumed because I was anti-authoritarian and because Bush was considered a conservative at the time, and I didn't like Bush and I didn't like his foreign policy, and I was anti-war, that's the camp that I fit into. So at 18, I voted the first time, and I just voted NDP to be a little shit disturber, to be perfectly honest, right? Because I had conservative parents. And then I went to Alberta to study acting for a year in political science. And people don't realize this, but at the time, Alberta had a really strong NDP underground that was like recruiting all of the young people. They had very active clubs and membership recruitment operations going on at all the universities. So like when Alberta flipped NDP, everybody was surprised. I was not, because I was there in 2006 and I was completely indoctrinated into thinking that Tommy Douglas was the founder of the NDP, which is not true at all. He just ran for them once and didn't even win and then quit politics, right? So for a while, I like was very strong with the NDP. But my main thing is I've always been anti-war. Like 9/11 made me very anti-Middle Eastern involvement, right? And if you go back and you look at the history of Western involvement in the Middle East, we really haven't done anything good there, right? So I got really excited when Obama got elected. And it was like 2008. And I was like, this is great. But then he got elected and he started drone bombing kids in the Middle East. And I was like, oh, so now he's a dick too. But then all of my anti-war lefty friends were like, oh, no, it's okay when Obama does it. Like Obama's black. We can't say anything bad about Obama. And I was like, oh, you people are full of crap. I was like, you don't really care about the issues that I care about. You're just like virtue signaling. Right. And that's when I realized what identity politics was. And so then I became very jaded and I got married young. I had kids young. And I think when you actually have to pay taxes and you actually have to survive in the world, it pushes you conservative. It's that old adage. If you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're old, you don't have a brain. And so it pushed me more to the conservative side because I'm like, at least if all of these politicians are full of crap, like conservative policies make fiscal sense, right? And it's funny, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So it was that you're talking about fiscal sense. Do you feel like that was the driver when you made the transition to the conservatives? Like you felt like there's a lot of hypocrisy, we'll say, in all parties in politics, but like that fiscal responsibility, like at least on this one issue, they should be better. Was that kind of the motivator there?
Yeah, it was. I saw how wasteful government spending was. I saw how bad for the economy it was. I saw how it pushed inflation rates, right? People think that wages are the way to bring people out of poverty. It's not. It's actually deflating the dollar. So your buying power has more dollar because wages will never keep pace with inflation. And that's what we've seen since the 1970s, right? That's what all the trends have suggested. So I mean, I like my values, other than fiscally learning about budgeting and saving money and that sort of thing have not changed. I'm still the same anti-establishment person I always was, right? I just realized that conservative economic policy makes more sense. And I really liked Max when he was running for the conservative leadership. Like, I actually joined the Conservative Party so that I could vote for him. I was a huge fan of his. I first saw him, I think, on George Stroumboulopoulos' show back in like 2006 or something when he first got elected. And then he lost, and I thought it was crap because it was such small margins and he'd been leading in every race. But
12 out of 13 ballots, if I'm remembering correctly, and lost on the final one. And
by like the smallest margin possible.
Seems the dairy lobby, you're able to buy memberships at the last minute. You don't have to hold your membership for any period of time to be able to vote in the race. Yeah. And the dairy lobby was extremely upset with Mr. Bernier over his proposals on supply management, and they kind of motivated their base to go up and buy memberships and ensure that vote for anyone but him was kind of the motto, and it worked apparently.
Yeah. It was really sad about that. But I didn't join it. You know what? I followed him. I saw how terrible Andrew Scheer was, and he started his own party. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I love all these values, but I'm still going to vote conservative because I don't want to split the vote in 2019. So I didn't. I voted conservative in that election. And then the pandemic hit and everything was terrible. And Aaron O'Toole came out with his carbon tax plan, and that was the last straw for me, right? Like, part of my evolution from NDP to conservative was I was one of those people who, like, An Inconvenient Truth came out, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. We got to save the planet. We're going to die soon. And I, like, ate it all up, hook, line, and sinker, because I was a dumb 19-year-old and I didn't know anything. And then, like, I watched, was it Steven Crowder had a video, like, debunking all of the myths in it. And, like, his 5-minute video was like, like, I've been lied to. Like, this is some BS, right? So carbon taxes don't work. They're pointless here in Canada, right? Our emissions are 1.5% of global emissions. If you actually, this is the funny thing too, they don't factor in our own forests in our calculation of carbon emissions. So if you factor in our own forests, because we have, like, all of the trees, we're actually carbon neutral. So all that carbon taxing, carbon pricing, carbon crediting does is disproportionately negatively affects Canadian businesses and families, making everything more expensive. It's just a way for the government to, like, tax regular Canadians and then give the corporate lobby more welfare, which I'm totally against, right? So when
I'm just writing down topics as we go here. So if it looks like I'm not paying attention, I'm actually making sure I have points to come back to. So I apologize.
It's okay. I'm known for my rants. I can be a little long-winded. So, but yeah. So when Aaron O'Toole came out with that carbon, with the switch that flipped in my head was I realized Aaron O'Toole doesn't care about conservative or liberal or libertarian Canadians, right? He thinks we're an automatic vote, and he doesn't respect our vote, right? That's why he keeps pandering to the left, because he just wants to form government. He doesn't actually care about the policy that he pushes, and he doesn't care about the country, right? So that's when it clicked in my head that, like, I don't care who wins this election. I don't care how bad it gets. The only thing that I care about is my vote has value, and I want to give it to somebody who has earned it. And Max has earned my vote by he stands up for his principles. He doesn't back down on the issues. You know, he'll be in the Maritimes talking about equalization, even though, you know, that's not a popular topic in the Maritimes because they survive on equalization. You know, I really respect somebody who sticks to their guns. And I don't know, I sort of applied to be a candidate on a whim because I saw that they were accepting applications for candidates. And I was like, well, I'm loud and obnoxious. It might be fun to get up on a debate stage with these other people and call them out on their BS. And that was in March when I applied. And then all of a sudden, July, August, the world went absolutely bonkers. And I was like, oh, like my candidacy means something to people. I can't just, this isn't just a fun little jokey thing. Like I have to take it very seriously. So for the last month, I have just been like all day long campaign, like delivering signs, delivering flyers, doing events, talking to people, fielding phone calls, sign waving, everything that I can do to let people know if they're not okay what's going on with the world, they have a party that's got their back, that will fight for them, and that won't back down.
All right, so we touched on a few key topics I wrote down here. I have inflation, carbon taxes, and the flip-flop, and then vote split, automatic vote. We kind of talk about those three topics. But on inflation, so one of the things I've noticed, I've set a couple schedules out. I'm reviewing the liberal and conservative platforms tomorrow. I'm hoping to get the NDP and People's Party before the election, ideally Sunday. But every platform other than the People's Party, and I will pull this up, and not everybody will agree with this either, but let's pull it up, make sure I have, there we go. So a People's Party government will eliminate all corporate subsidies and other inefficient government interventions, bailouts of failing companies, regional development grants, conditional loans, loan guarantees with implicit study, yada, yada, that unfairly support some companies or business sectors. This will generate savings between 5 to 10 billion a year. They will gradually reduce over the course of one mandate the corporate income tax down from 15 to 10. And then over the course of one mandate, gradually abolish the personal capital gains tax. So they touch on these things, but the one thing in the People's Party platform that's fundamentally different is they're not promising spending until, I guess, in a position that the budget is balanced. This is one of the fundamental sticking points. And the topic of inflation, I see it as directly connected because we're looking at, I think the U.S. Federal Reserve just released their inflation numbers. They're running 5% right now is the annual estimate, and they're projecting 4% over the next 4 to 5 years. So we're looking at 20% inflation as an optimistic outlook in the United States. Here we can see the inflation is rampant when we go to the grocery store. And so one of my personal gripes is that none of these politicians during the debate answered the question on inflation, like how do we pay for this? Because when the government steps up and spends money we don't have, I'll get your opinion here, but it leads to inflation. It leads to more dollars chasing less things. And over time, that causes a creep of prices, and it's getting faster and faster as we print more money. We're at over $1.1 trillion in debt now, spent more than both world wars combined under this prime minister during this COVID crisis. So what are your takes on, I guess we'll just say, the budget and how that ties into inflation? What would you say to Canadians that say we need to spend right now in order to help people?
Well, the government spending hinders people more than it helps people, right? Because we pay an inordinate amount of taxes, right? Like if you think about it, you earn money, your income gets taxed, right? And then you go to the store and that income that's already been taxed gets taxed again when you purchase something, right? And then you have to pay property taxes on the property that you already bought year on it. Like you pay the property taxes yearly basis, but you've already paid taxes on that property with the first time you bought it. If you sell that property, like Trudeau wants to put a personal capital gains tax on your personal residence. So then there's going to be another tax on top of that. And then when you're dead, all your money gets taxed in the top income bracket. So you have nothing to give your children. Plus, not only do you have your final income tax that you have to do upon your death, but anything like any property that you leave to your kids also gets taxed in an inheritance tax, right? So
used car sales tax is by far the most egregious one. And that's the one that came to my mind too. Like you buy a new car and then you could sell it 20 times in the cycle of its life, and the government has their hand out at every transaction.
So people don't understand. If you just cut all those taxes, you will have so much more money. You have to pay for a effing plastic bag at a grocery store, okay? Do you know how much those bags cost them? Not a lot. They don't, because they buy them in bulk. They have thousands of these tiny little plastic bags, okay? I work in manufacturing. I know that when you buy something in bulk, you get it dirt cheap, right? Like there's so many left. You have to pay recycling taxes, right? So you can't even take your pop cans and your bottles back to the depot and like get a little bit of extra money because you've already paid that deposit fee when you bought them. So instead of getting extra money for doing the right thing, they're just giving you your money back if you're not too lazy to take it to the bottle depot. Like it's insane. And if the government just, instead of redistributing everybody's wealth where they think it should go, if you just let Canadians keep their own money, like we would be shocked at how much we saved if we just didn't have to pay taxes. And we didn't used to have to pay taxes. This is the thing, is taxes were like income tax was brought in after the Second World War to pay for the military-industrial complex. So taxes weren't even a thing to make people's lives better. It's a thing to fund their endless war machine and their endless corporate welfare and just to benefit the wealthy, right? So, and also, another thing I want to say about inflation running at 5%, I used to work in life insurance and segregated funds. And segregated funds are like a mutual fund, but that's an insurance product. And we used to tell people, if you're not matching pace with inflation on your interest rates, then your money is devaluing, right? So right now, those of us that are too broke to save, and I'm probably in that category because I have 4 children, right? It's hard for me to save money. I am actually in a better state than people who have been saving all their lives because that money is just going down and down and down in value because like interest rates with a GIC, I think last time I checked, were like 1.5%. What's that going to do for your money when inflation's running at 5%? You're not going to have the money that you need when you retire at this rate. So like our entire system is messed up. And we saw it with the CERB benefits, right? The government fast-tracked all these EI claims. They had a terrible system. They didn't make it clear. It was hard to apply for. And then they told you, oh, we're going to tax all this income back on at tax time. So we're just going to give you $2,000, but we're going to tax it based on if you go back to work or whatever you ended up making. So it's really, and then I got hit. I've never, ever not gotten a refund ever in my entire working life. This year, I was forced to take CERB because I have 4 children. And when they couldn't go to school, I couldn't go to work for like 4 or 5 months, right? I was working like 1 day a week so that I could be home with my kids to take care of them. And I got dinged. Huge with CERB. I know tons of parents who don't make tons of money and were not really rich. And CERB really hurt Canadian families.
I was just speaking with a young man, and same thing. He's got student loan debt. He had, worked all year, and because of being laid off and having to take the CERB, he was forced at the end of the year to pay back a bunch of money after already having kind of a hard year, right? And so this is a lot of people in that situation. One thing you touched on, you said the working class. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and student loans, government student loans are a huge Ponzi scheme. Like Mike Rowe said it best, we're loaning money we don't have to train kids for jobs that don't exist who will never be able to pay it back, right? Like you shouldn't be able to get a student loan so that you can go take a gender studies program, right? You shouldn't, because there's no practical use of a gender studies program other than to teach gender studies. And no offense, if that's your deal, if you like it, that's fine. But the government shouldn't be on the hook for paying for it. You should, because it's not useful to the economy. The government should only be investing in programs that are useful to the economy, that get Canadians working, and that get Canadians self-reliant and self-sufficient, because that's the way that people flourish and grow, right? And a lot of our programs that we have right now are designed to keep people dependent on the government. Because if people are dependent on the government, you can get them to do whatever you want. I have so many friends who are like, am I going to lose my disability if I don't get the vaccine? Am I going to lose my CCB? Am I going to lose my medical insurance? And the truth is, probably, because the government controls all of that.
Yeah, you touched on working class, like having their money devalued through inflation. I think that's something that gets missed quite often, but the working class is the ones is the group that gets hit hardest. It's the working poor that get hit the hardest when it comes to inflation. So when the government goes crazy and spends all this money that we don't have, you don't have assets, you don't have tangible things like property or different investments, and if your money's in savings, you're literally watching your purchasing power every year diminish as a result of poor fiscal policy.
Yeah, and we have a system, right, that really it punishes people it punishes lower income families for being married. Because if you have a 2-parent working household with kids, you're going to get less from the government than if you're a single mom with kids. And I face this because, in 2016, my first husband left me and I was a single mom for a while. And when I decided to go back to work and to get remarried, I had to balance all these things. And I saw, oh yeah, the government's going to make my life slightly harder because I've decided to get married. And that's not right either, right? We need to help single moms, people that are in bad positions, but we also shouldn't have a system that penalizes people for making what is inarguably a more responsible decision. It's a more responsible decision to have a 2-parent household. It's easier to raise kids with 2 people.
All right, so we'll move into our second topic here, carbon taxes. We'll talk about the Aaron O'Toole flip-flop on that. So obviously he had pledged, he signed the no carbon tax pledge. I'm not sure when he did that, but ultimately he's flip-flopped. He's turned around. He said he will implement a carbon tax, but he will cap it at $50 a ton. You just want to touch on carbon taxes and kind of, if you can paint the big picture, I guess, on why this is the wrong way. So I'll just add to this. We pay 24.7 cents a liter on provincial gas tax right now between the federal and provincial taxes. Then you pay GST on top of that. Then there's a carbon tax baked into that cost. Now, so right now, as an example, it's about $1.39 here in Kitchener. But the actual gas price per liter is 83 to about 87 cents, 88 cents at the top end here in Canada. So let's just talk about that and expand.
Okay, let's talk about gas prices for a minute. Gas comes into the port of Vancouver, right? Where do you think has the highest gas prices in all of Canada? Vancouver, because of all of the taxes, the municipal taxes, the provincial taxes, right? I live in Coquitlam, 45 minutes outside of downtown Vancouver, an hour if there's traffic. Gas right here is sitting at $1.59, and it was $1.70 for like a month or so. I don't know why it's gone down, but I'm glad. But yeah, so gas comes into our port, gets loaded on trucks, gets shipped across the country, right? Cheaper everywhere else, even though there is more cost associated with getting the gas to Alberta, to the fact that, oh my gosh, our gasoline comes into the port of Vancouver and then gets shipped to Alberta is ridiculous to me. So carbon taxes don't work because they just make using gas more expensive, but there's no alternative to gas. Like, there's no alternative to oil. I'm sorry. Right now, renewable technologies are not reliable. If anybody's read Alex Epstein's book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, like, it's brilliant at explaining why all these alternative technologies don't work, right? So, and people don't realize, like, I love the keyboard warriors, and I love the like iPhone tweeters when they get after me for my views on climate change, because it's like, if you really are that passionate about it, your clothes, your computers, everything pretty much is made of has some sort of plastic element to it, and plastic comes from petroleum. So if we don't have oil right now, our lives are vastly, vastly different, right? If we don't have oil in our products, we literally go back to like pre-industrial revolution times overnight. So I don't know what else to say other than there's so much cognitive dissonance and there's so much hypocrisy. And the climate change warriors are not informed on all sides of the argument. They're informed on one side of the argument, right?
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, cost benefit analysis comes to mind. you replace plastic bags but you replace it with paper. Well, what's the carbon footprint of that? If that is the sole measure, I have issues with carbon being the only measure we measure environmental issues with. But I feel like, and I'll get your comments on this, that climate change has become like a blanket statement for anything environmental related. If I just say climate change, then I can elicit, an income source from the public if I can get them in agreement. The things like, the fire in BC, lit in BC recently, and they blame it on climate change, but they don't talk about forest floor management and having fire crews and different things, traditional ways of trying to prevent wildfires. They just kind of leave out these inconvenient arguments. Like, we all this environmental talk, and meanwhile, there was just the other day, Sheridan, Mississauga, there's a stream up there it's filthy, and there's raw sewage being pumped out of into the St. Lawrence here in Canada. So all these issues exist, but then we just throw the climate change banner over the top, and we can say, well, we need your money to solve these things. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is carbon the issue, or would you say that the environmental issue is more nuanced than a silver bullet of just carbon?
I would definitely say this argument is super nuanced. Like, you mentioned the fires in Lytton, BC. It's not a coincidence that we had terrible fires the same year that Humanity, or whatever, that stupid environmental group spent all flippin' year protesting on the Cambie Bridge and shutting down traffic, right? Like, they were protesting all of the planned forest management. People don't understand. We plant more trees than we cut down, and we don't backburn like we should. And the First Nations used to backburn as part of forest management. All Indigenous cultures who lived in forested areas did this. This is a well-known practice for renewing the forest, and it also puts a lot of nutrients and minerals back into the soil through the burning and the ash and stuff like that. So people don't understand how interconnected this issue is. And look, climate alarmism is a religion, and it's a cult. It's a religion. These people are not based on facts. I was just in a debate with the Iranian Civic Association in my riding, and I was the first one asked about climate change. And I said my pitch, right? The same pitch that I gave you. And not a single candidate that was in that debate actually counteracted any one of my points. None of them had an argument against anything I said. They just went on to talk about their party's platform. And I'm like, if you don't have an argument for what I'm saying, right? If you don't have a counter argument, you don't know all the facts. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just reading dogmatic policy at this point. And to talk about carbon in the atmosphere, this is something I learned this summer. Our atmosphere is 450 parts per million carbon. And at 150 parts per million, all life on Earth begins to die. So we are actually very, very close to that dangerous line of killing off our plant life and killing off people in the process. We are very close, if we get our carbon too low, of going back into an ice age, which would be worse than global warming. Because will global warming affect the coastlines? Yes. But it will affect it at a rate that people will just move away, right? And more carbon in the air actually encourages plant growth. It'll actually make it possible to grow food in regions like northern BC where it's really hard to, right? So Patrick Moore makes great arguments on this point, that it actually could be a net benefit if we had more plant growth. Because arborists and people who take care of trees and who work in greenhouses, they pump in 25,000 parts per million carbon into their greenhouse to encourage plant growth. So
yeah,
we really don't.
One of the things that gets missed on that topic is, like, it's literally greenhouse technology to pump in carbon to increase plant growth. And if I'm not mistaken, I feel open to correct me, but they didn't account for this in the models. The fact that the more CO2 there is in the environment, the more the plants actually absorb CO2 because they grow alongside with it. So it's kind of, again, a lot of things based on modeling, which if the last year and a half has been any indication on what living under modeling is like, that's a good summary of, I think, the carbon conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And again, if you look at 100-year graph, yes, it looks like the world is heating up to unseen levels. If you look at a 65 million year graph, oh no, we were in an ice age at the beginning of the 20th century. We're coming out of that ice age. We're in a warming period. This is natural Earth trajectory. This has happened many years before we were on the planet. It'll happen many years after, as a species, we've killed each other off. It's just the cycle of our planet.
So just touch on that. So you don't want to, you do care about the environment. What do you see as the practical solutions? Let's rephrase that a different way. Because again, as soon as you talk against carbon taxes, against, I mean, these grandiose plans of saving the world, people begin to say, well, you're anti-climate. You don't care about the climate. So what is the practical approach to, like we said earlier, really a nuanced discussion? Because it's easy to make a blanket statement, say climate change, but forest fires are fundamentally different to how we would handle river pollution, to how we would handle flooding or building in floodplains, different things. It's a very broad conversation that it's easy to blanket, but it's not easy to talk about in practicality. So what are those practical solutions that you see? And then what is the People's Party of Canada approach on that?
Well, so I think that number one, oil and gas has awesome innovations for making those industries cleaner. And we have some of the cleanest oil and gas industries. So I think allowing us to produce oil and gas for the world instead of places like relying on Chinese coal or relying on Saudi oil or relying on Venezuelan oil. Like, there are no standards there. It's much more environmentally impactful if we get all of our oil from there. And if you think that these places are going to stop producing oil and coal just because of climate change, like, you're wrong. These are regimes that don't care about protecting the environment. And I personally, I don't know if this is in the platform or not. Personally, I'm okay with putting restrictions and regulations about keeping our rivers clean, because we only have a finite supply of fresh water on this planet. We have most of it here in Canada, and I think it is our duty as stewards of this wonderful country to protect our rivers and our streams and our lakes and stuff like that. So, but there's so many layers to this, right? Nuclear energy is cool technology. And when you look at every nuclear plant that's melted down, like Fukushima was supposed to be retired 40 years ago. And if you look at Deepwater Horizon, that wasn't actually a failure of the technology being used. That was a failure of executives cutting corners. So I am totally okay with large penalties for oil executives when you can see the paper trail of the engineers told them this and they didn't do it, and then there was an accident. Because when you look at oil spills, when you look at gas line leaks, when you look at these catastrophes, they never stem from the technology. They either stem from the technology was not upkept properly, or the executives were cutting corners, right? So we have to hold these big businesses accountable for how they're running their operations.
It's like disincentives. I know people don't like to talk about them, but if it is more profitable and if you don't care about the big picture and it's more profitable to do the wrong thing, unfortunately, there's a large segment of businesses that will continue to do that wrong thing. So when we expand that to the environment, you need to not only have the laws on the book, but you need to enforce those laws, and there needs to be penalties that are greater than the profit or the upside for the business. So it just makes sense. But I'll pull up the actual People's Party platform here, because here's a few of the points of contention. We'll just get your kind of one of the things that gets attacked about the People's Party of Canada, I guess, it's the withdrawal from the Paris Accord and abandon unrealistic greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So just touch on that. I think that's probably the biggest one to touch on, but that's the one that gets everybody up in arms, is the removal from the Paris Climate Accord. And they worry, like, as soon as we say we're not going to, deal with carbon emissions, people panic and they assume that is everything to do with the environment. If we don't do it, the world's going to go to, hell in a handbasket, and we're all going to die here because it's going to be unlivable.
So I want to pose this question to any greenies out there. I want to know, what is going to be the net benefit of cutting emissions from 1.5% of the global problem to 0.75%. Because right now, a lot of the parties, I think it's the NDP, are like, we're going to cut emissions by 50%. And you're like, oh, that's going to cripple us. People won't be able to heat their homes. People will freeze to death. People will die of heat. Like, they talked about old people dying in their homes because of the heat wave. Yes, because nobody can afford air conditioning, because our power prices are huge. Like, I live in an air conditioned house, and I know exactly how much that air conditioning costs. So you're going to have more people dying during heat waves if nobody can afford to cool their house in the summer or heat their house during the winter, right? And again, what is the net benefit globally of cutting 1.5% down to 0.75%? That's not a huge margin, right? Us cutting down our carbon emissions does not make a dent. So why are we going to make our country unlivable for Canadians for something that's not going to make a dent?
I think the argument from from the Liberal Party, from Justin Trudeau, has been, he was asked about this, and I think he said, well, we need to be leaders on the global stage, as if, I guess the premise is like, if Canada does these things and they really don't have to, China and India and other big polluters will step up because we did the right thing. And I can understand some of the logic in, like, you need to lead by example, but
here's the thing. Leading by example only works if you have a principled population behind you, right? You can't lead by example when you're dealing with psychopaths, right? Xi Jinping is a psychopath, okay? He does not care. You think that he's going to hinder his citizenry just to make things better for the rest of the world? No, he's not. Also, you need a strong leader that people look up to, okay? Justin Trudeau is a joke on the world stage. Nobody cares about him. Nobody takes him seriously. There's all sorts of shots of him going to these conferences with world leaders and like trying to get a handshake, and like they walk away from him. Like, nobody respects Justin Trudeau. So nobody's going to respect Justin Trudeau's policy on climate change. I'm sorry. But also, again, if you want to lead by example, you need to have a principled population to follow you. And when you're dealing with these mass dictatorships, they're all psychopaths. They're not going to follow Canada. They're just not.
All right, last question here. We'll close on this and we'll open up the line. So again, if you want to ask Kimberly a question, please click the link at the top here. I'll post it again right now, and we'll bring you into the chat and you can ask a question directly. All right. Vote splitting, you said something to the effect of it's automatically expected that the Conservatives will earn your vote. There's a lot of talk about vote splitting right now, that the People's Party of Canada, Brian Lilly, actually, of the Toronto Sun, just wrote an article saying that a vote for the People's Party of Canada is a vote for Justin Trudeau. So let's just talk on that. Why is it not an automatic vote split? And let's talk about, it's assumed that they'll just get the vote. So why is it important to you on this topic to get it across that the People's Party of Canada is fundamentally different, and that, we'll go to that, it needs to be earned. A vote needs to be earned.
Yeah, so this vote splitting argument, I have gone up against so much cognitive dissonance with it. Number one, getting Trudeau out is a bad goal if the alternative is just as bad or worse, right? There's no difference between Liberal policy and CPC policy at this point, right? You're just trading one dictator for another. When has that ever worked? Okay. They traded Batista for Castro, wasn't great. In Iran, they traded the Shahs for the Ayatollah. That didn't work out very well. In Iraq, we traded Saddam for now the rise of ISIS. Like, this, it doesn't work, number one. Number two, Aaron O'Toole, nobody realizes the impact of this, but he wanted to use the Emergencies Act to ground all travel across the country in March of 2020. And he said that Trudeau didn't go far enough with the mandates that he put in. Now, the the Emergencies Act used to be the War Measures Act until Trudeau Sr. used it outside of a time of war, and then Parliament changed it to the Emergencies Act So, oh, now you don't have to wait for a war. You can take people's property, you can ground all travel, you can rip people of all their civil liberties, and you don't need to, like, you could just do it, right? The government can do it without any sort of mandate. So I want to know, when Erin O'Toole wanted to do that in the beginning of the pandemic, why we somehow think that Trudeau is worse than the Conservatives. That's my number one point that I make. But also, we're not splitting the Conservative vote. We're the only party with conservative values, right? The CPC, the Liberal Party, and the NDP, they're splitting the Liberal vote, right? They have the Liberal policies. The CPC are stealing voters from us because they're too scared to vote for something different. Because in Canada, we don't vote leaders in, we vote leaders out. So all we do is we have a Liberal government for a while, we get pissed off, we vote in Conservative. We have a Conservative government for a while, we get pissed off, we vote in Liberal, right? We've been doing this for like 50 years. It's not working for us. So let's try something new, right? Let's vote for the party that, number one, has the principles we like, number two, has a leader with integrity, and number three, has an entire roster of candidates that are not sleazy politicians. I am not bought and paid for. I have no special interest. My interest is in my community, right? My supporters are regular people, and those are the people I'm going to be fighting for.
All right. I think that's a pretty good place to end it. It doesn't look like we have any takers, but elevator pitch. Why should somebody part with their vote for Kimberly Brundell? Why should they not just vote for the People's Party of Canada, but specifically you as their candidate representing them in the constituency of, I'm just going to let you say it because I'm going to butcher it again. Coquitlam?
Coquitlam. So Coquitlam. Coquitlam. Yeah. Coquitlam-Port Coquitlam. It's very simple, right? People should vote for me because I'm the only candidate that has their best interests at heart. And I will put the interests of my community above myself and above the party if needs be, right? My NDP counterpart is a city councilwoman who was censured for sensitive documents, right? She's just a politician climbing her way up the ladder, and, running for office as MP is the next step in that ladder. Ron McKinnon is our current MP. He's been utterly ineffectual. He hasn't really done anything. He doesn't scare me as much as the Conservative. He is just a doddering old man, but he's only running because he wants his last 2 years to get his pension. And the Conservative I'm running against, Katerina Anastasiadis, has been the least accessible candidate in the riding. She doesn't answer her own emails. Everybody gets a copy-paste response. None of the constituents that I have talked to have actually been able to get a hold of her and talk to her about their issues. Every time they ask for, oh, is this in the platform or is this in the platform, that nobody gets a straight answer, right? These Conservatives are not giving people a straight answer. I think she has one election ad where she's in it. Her other election ad is just Erin O'Toole, right? Like, this is how inaccessible this person is. She's not even in her own campaign ads half the time. And so people should vote for me because I'm principled. I care about the community. I live in the community, and I'm going to fight like hell. I also, again, I have no allegiances. I'm not bought. I'm not endorsed. And I'm not politically correct. I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm not afraid of anybody coming after me.
I think that's a good place to close it. Thank you for joining us, Kimberly Brundell, in Coquitlam-Port Coquitlam. I think I did it.
You did it.
Victory. So sometimes you can get it right. Well, I think we'll close out there. I got a few videos to close. And I hear you're going door knocking. You're doing signs. What are you doing tonight?
Sign waving. We're doing sign waving in the torrential thunderstorm that is hitting Vancouver right now, right? See, who else is waving their own signs in the rain? This is how much I care.
Fair. Thank you again for joining us, Ms. Brundell, and best of luck on the campaign trail.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. All right. So that is Kimberly Brundell of Coquitlam-Port Coquitlam. I did it again. So if you are in that area, and you like what you heard tonight, she will be on the ballot. She is willing to represent you as your candidate for the People's Party of Canada. So if she said things that resonate with you, make sure to find her name on the ballot. And I just want to end out here. I guess we got 10 minutes. I normally do an hour. Just topic of masking in schools. So I had the privilege of doing call-ins, which is actually why I got the idea to offer it out to our audience, with someone named Carlin Boroshenko. She's a psychologist. And I asked her the question about masking children and kind of children's development, because I said, like the experts here, they downplay it all the time and act as though it is not a big issue. It's kind of just a minor thing. It's a minor inconvenience that children and adults have to deal with. But listen to what she said when I asked the question. I think it's very relevant to the topics at hand today as we're going through the fourth wave and we're heading into our election on a fundamental question of vaccine passports and mandates. So here we are. This is Carlin Boroshenko. From some of the group think here and be around like-minded people is a good idea, but I took my kids out. We're homeschooling now. I never thought I'd be doing that, but the mask mandate and just the general fear that teachers were pushing, just that mentality rubbing off on my kids, I didn't want it. And the mask mandate has never made sense to me. But from you're in psychology, if I'm correct?
Yeah. Yep.
From a psychology perspective, how do you look at that? Because my understanding, I'm an independent journalist here in Canada, is I've looked into it. It's like diction and language development, social development, all these things tied into it. And fundamentally, the thing that pisses me off, if I can say that, is that none of the people that are so-called experts here that get trotted out in front of the cameras ever mention the harm that this is doing to kids. They say it's not that big of a deal and they downplay it all the time. But everything I know about development, social behavior, psychology behind it says that this is, we're coming at 18 months now, almost at the 2-year anniversary coming up on, and that's 2 years of school that kids haven't been seeing their teacher talk, haven't been seeing their friends talk, been socially isolated. So just what's your take on that?
So my take on masks, and this has been my same take from, frankly, the very beginning. I was always very opposed to mask mandates in any form. And my take on it is a little bit different in that our mouth is the thing that we use to express ourselves. It's the thing that we use to give value to the world. And if we are covering up our mouth every single day, that is going to inhibit our ability to express ourselves. Now, separate from being a professional psychologist in real life, I had a childhood where I grew up not being able to express myself. I know what it means to go for years at a time not being able to say what I think. And that had a pretty profound effect on just how I valued myself, my self-esteem, my confidence. And so I think in 5 to 10 years, we are going to see a crisis of mental health of the children that have been forced to wear these masks. I think we're going to see increased depression, increased anxiety. I think we're going to have a lot of issues in terms of self-esteem and confidence. I think we're going to have issues in terms of them being able to even vocalize their thoughts, vocalize their emotions. I think we're going to have issues in terms of them being able to read the emotions on other people. This is going to be a boon for people who work with kids with autism, because this is what we're talking about with autism, not being able to recognize social cues, right? It's going to be the same thing, but it's going to be self-inflicted. So I think it's going to cause a lot of mental health problems that people are not talking about.
All right. So I'll leave that there. If you want to check out Dr. Carlin Boroshenko, I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. She has a channel on YouTube. She does some interesting work. She's not afraid to touch on hard to hit conversations. She's formerly somebody that would consider herself a Democrat that slowly kind of went to the other side, and she offers an interesting perspective. So I highly recommend checking out her work. But you hear there that this issue is cast aside as it's an inconvenience. It's just a minor issue. And there is a certified psychologist telling you, a lot of the things that I suspected and I talked about on this show of this is not going to lead to good places. You need to see people's faces to develop language, to get your diction properly, to develop socially. And again, these are just one of many issues that are on the table here, but I don't see any way out between a vote for Conservatives, Liberal, NDP, Green. I'm not telling anybody to vote anyway, but I'm just saying these parties, Aaron O'Toole's proposing that we have booster test or rapid test every day for those that don't get the vaccine. This is kind of the world we're living in, where the alternative is going to be crazy, and they're still going to be talking about masking, social distancing, all this stuff still going to be around. And on that one single topic, I talk about cost-benefit analysis, looking at the big picture on these things, and I'll just leave you with this. But if that's just one issue that you're hearing a alternative opinion on from a matter and qualified to speak about it, and she's saying, listen, this is terrible for development. I'm worried about social development. I'm worried about language development. I'm worried about how this affects them over time. How many other experts are afraid to come forward? Because few and far in between are we hearing these people come up and speak against the narrative. And so leave it with that. That is just one piece of the big puzzle here, and when it comes to pandemic policies, but it very much has ruled our lives for the last 18, 19 months. And so I'll leave you with that thought. These issues aren't minor. It's okay to question these things. It's okay to ask big questions. And furthermore, you're going to have a choice in what you want to see the country do. Come Monday, if you haven't already voted, get out to the polls, whoever you're voting for, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Green, People's Party of Canada, doesn't matter. If you have trouble getting out to the polls, make sure you contact people so that you can get to the polls. Make your voice heard. Make it count. Thank you for joining Diverge Media. I'm Greg Staley, and thank you, Kimberly Brundell, for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you.